All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We are taking a trip all the way back to the 5th century BCE to look at the life and, honestly, the incredibly disruptive mind of arguably the most influential thinker in Western history. Yep, we're talking about Socrates. As you'll see in our visuals today, we're going to shift from these warm, vibrant terracotta tones into some pretty cold, harsh grays, because this is a story that starts with an insatiable, fiery curiosity, but ends in a very dark, tragic condemnation.
And really, the whole thing kicks off with this incredibly famous paradox. You've probably heard it. I know that I know nothing. Right away, that sets the tone for his entire quest. It pulls us straight into the streets of ancient Athens. Because while everyone else was walking around completely convinced of their own absolute brilliance, Socrates made history by claiming complete and utter ignorance. But how in the world did he arrive at that kind of radical stance?
Well, let's look at the catalyst. Section 1, the spark. The oracle's declaration.
So our story really gets going with a trip up to the Temple of Delphi. A buddy of Socrates actually went up there and asked the oracle a pretty straightforward question. He asked, is there anyone wiser than Socrates? And the priestess gave a flat, one-word answer. No. Now, what's totally fascinating here is Socrates' reaction. When he heard this, he thought it was absolutely absurd. He genuinely believed he didn't know anything of real importance. So he decided he was going to test the gods. He set out into the Athenian agora, the main bustling marketplace, determined to find someone, literally anyone, who was wiser than he was, just to prove the oracle wrong.
Which brings us to how he actually conducted this search. Section 2, the method, questioning certainty.
To do this, he relied heavily on a tool called the elenchus. And honestly, it was deceptively simple. He'd just walk up to supposed experts, politicians, famous poets, skilled artisans, and he would ask them these massive foundational questions. Things like, what is courage? Or what exactly is justice? And whatever they answered, he would just follow their logic, step by step, right down the rabbit hole. By doing this, he essentially exposed the contradictions in their thinking, one by one. Now, it's really crucial to understand that he wasn't doing this just to be a jerk or to humiliate people, even though, it often did embarrass them. The goal was to dissolve false certainty. Just think about how incredibly powerful a tool like that would be today for dismantling our own unquestioned assumptions.
Ultimately, what made Socrates so different from the guys he was questioning wasn't that he had some secret, massive database of facts in his head. Not at all. It was his honest, blunt recognition of what he didn't know. While everyone else assumed they were wise, he just openly confessed his ignorance. And the wild part is, in that confession, he actually found a strange, almost paradoxical kind of superiority. He knew that he did not know.
But, he wasn't navigating this intellectual minefield completely alone. He actually relied on what he called his daimonion. Socrates talked about this inner voice a lot. Now, it wasn't a god in the traditional sense, and it wasn't just your standard run-of-the-mill conscience either. It was this lifelong, deeply private internal warning system. He said it never told him what to actually do, but it would always pop up to warn him about what to avoid. It was basically a spiritual guardrail, just constantly keeping him aligned with the truth.
All right, let's shift gears a bit to his core philosophical claim. Section 3, the philosophy, virtue is knowledge.
Right at the very heart of everything Socrates taught is this super radical comparison. Virtue is knowledge, and vice is ignorance. He actually argued that literally no one does wrong willingly. Let that sink in for a second. He genuinely believed that whenever we do something wrong, it's just a failure of understanding. It's a mistaken belief that what we're doing is actually good for us. So vice is just ignorance wearing a mask. This was a game changer of an idea. It meant that moral failure isn't this permanent, unfixable stain on your soul. It's something that can actually be corrected by reason and by education.
And this specific idea, tying reason directly to practical everyday virtue, it didn't just die out in ancient Greece. It spread like wildfire through history. Centuries later, it echoed profoundly through Islamic philosophy, especially in the works of the monumental thinker Averroes or Ibn Rushd. It's amazing to see how ideas like this act as massive bridges, connecting totally different civilizations across time.
But, as you can probably guess, running around Athens challenging the absolute foundations of society rarely goes unpunished. Section 4, the climax, trial, and condemnation.
Okay, so officially, the charges on paper were that he was corrupting the youth of Athens and failing to honor the city's gods. But if we look at the actual political realities, it's a completely different story. Decades of deep resentment had built up against him. You literally cannot spend your entire life making powerful, elite politicians look foolish in the public square without making some serious enemies. So those official charges, they were really just a formal mask for political revenge.
So he's standing there, facing a jury of 500 angry Athenians. And does he beg for his life? Nope, not at all. Instead, he provocatively defends his whole examined life. He drops this famous line, comparing himself to a gadfly sent by the gods to sting a great but sluggish horse into wakefulness. He basically looked the jury in the eye and told them his annoying, disruptive questioning was a public service. As you might imagine, being called a lazy horse did not exactly win the jury over.
Which brings us to the sobering end of our timeline today. Section 5, the resolution, death, and legacy.
The end comes pretty fast. First, that jury condemns him to death, though actually by a relatively narrow margin. But here's the truly remarkable part. His wealthy friends bribe the guards and offer him a clear chance to escape, and he just flat out refuses. He argues that running away would be betraying the laws and the city that raised him, even if they were being completely unjust. So, surrounded by his weeping students, he calmly takes the cup of hemlock poison, drinks it, and spends his final moments just peacefully discussing the immortality of the soul. He was a philosopher right up until his heart stopped beating.
But before we wrap up, I have to throw in a massive caveat here. Socrates left absolutely no personal writings behind. None. Zero. Every single thing we've talked about in this explainer today comes entirely through the memory and interpretation of other people. He is the ultimate historical example of the unreliable narrator problem. Our main source is his star student, Plato, and the tricky thing is Plato loved to mix actual historical events with his own personal philosophical theories. Because of that, Socrates left behind a spirit of questioning, a method, rather than some strict, rigid rulebook written by his own hand.
Which leaves us with a really powerful final thought. A man who built his entire legacy on admitting the limits of his own knowledge leaves us with a question that is absolutely still worth asking right now. Are you willing to live the examined life and question your own certainties today? Socrates showed us that true, genuine wisdom only begins the moment we are brave enough to admit what we don't know. So I challenge you, take a little bit of that Socratic method into your own world this week. Question something you've always assumed was true. Until next time, keep questioning, and thanks so much for exploring this with me.